The following program is suitable for general audience of any age.
Tonight, we discuss home ownership in the context of apartments and condominiums. What are key areas in the law that one must be aware of? A very good evening and thank you for joining us on yet another episode of Law, Land and Liberty, where we bring to you key legal concepts and break it down for the layman. Now, today's topic is something that we have recently touched on in the very recent past, but we weren't able to get to all the nitty-gritties and also the practical context in which these kinds of laws apply, and that's specifically on condominium laws and apartment ownership. To exactly understand as a layman how exactly we're supposed to navigate these types of laws. And to speak to us on this very vast topic, we have a very new face on the program. We're very glad to invite onto the show for the first time Mr. Senaka, Desaram, attorney at law. So thank you so much for coming to the studio for this discussion today.
Thank you for inviting me.
The pleasure is ours. A bit of an introduction, of course. Mr. Senaka Desaram, attorney at law, he is very much well-versed in this area. Specifically, he was also the convener for the Committee on Law Reforms on this specific act as well. So safe to say we're in very good hands when it comes to understanding the areas of the law and also applying it in a practical context. Now, here's how we're going to be approaching this discussion. First of all, we'll be getting a bit of a brief touch-up, if I do say so myself, a little bit of an understanding on the fundamentals. Then we'll be going into the practicalities. And finally, what we can expect moving forward in this area of law.
Hello, my name is Sandali Karunakalage. Currently, I am an undergraduate student in University of Colombo, Faculty of Law. My question is on fundamental, how is condominium ownership governed?
All right, well, without any further ado, let's get right into this discussion. We do have a lot to cover. Thank you once again, sir, for volunteering to help us break down this very complicated area. Now, before we get to the specifics of the law, I think it's important for us to get a bit of a refresh on what exactly a condominium is. Can you help us understand, sir, in legal terms, what a condominium is?
Yes, so to understand what a condominium is, I will have an analogy with a flat. Now, we are all familiar with a flat. So most of the people think that a flat is a condominium. It's not the case. A condominium is a property which has been registered by way of a condominium plan, and it is a property by itself. It's like the house that we all are familiar with. You can sell it, you can transfer it and all that. But if you take a building with flats, you can't do that because it's only a flat. It's not condominium. So to get the distinction, a condominium is I should say a statute-generated building where it has individual apartments which you have sole ownership. Then you have common areas in that. So you have, like in good places, you will have a gym, you will have a pool, you have a recreational area. So those are all called common areas which people will enjoy in common. They own it in common. And also you get exclusive areas which are called accessory parcels. One thing is commonly known in Sri Lanka is your car park. So your car park also, it may be not very next to your apartment, but it may be somewhere else. But you also own that exclusively for yourself. So to put it in context, it's a legally created property by way of an act, and that is the apartment ownership law. And it's distinct from a flat, and it's distinct from a normal property you have.
Exactly. And as you mentioned as well, common areas and accessory parcels is one of the key features of apartment ownership, specifically in comparison to other types of sharing of land. I think that's an important area that we can delve into a little bit more as well. If you could help us understand the distinctions between traditional land ownership and ownership of a condominium, just to get a bit of a context.
Yes, that's a very good question, because a lot of clients come to us, they spend a lot of money and then they get frustrated in these buildings. So first thing is, if you are going to decide to live in a condominium, you have to know that you are sharing your virtual space other than your personal space of the condominium with others. So if you are not in for that, then you shouldn't go in for that. So basically a condominium regime is different. We'll say to a house is a house, you will own the house by yourself, you maintain it the way you want. If you don't want to maintain it, you will not. If you don't want to cut the grass, you let the grass grow. If you don't want to color wash it, if there's a lift in your house, you don't want to maintain it, you let it be. But in a condominium, you can't do that. So condominium is you have certain other units and other people also living in with it. So when you go into a condominium, the basic thing is there are a set of rules, and those rules are mandatory. For example, there was a client of mine, he bought a condominium, he bought actually quite a big condominium, and he's a lover of dogs. So he was not advised that you can't have like pets of that caliber that he had, can't be entertained in his apartment. Of course, he had like bought it, one whole room for his dogs. But so there are a set of rules. If you're going in for a condominium, you have to know, unlike a normal house, you have to be game to comply with the rules. You have a thing called a management fee. So either monthly, quarterly, or annually, you have to pay a monthly fee. And there are substances you can't bring into this place. There is a security regime. So all those things, it's not absolute ownership per se. You may have ownership to live in it, but it's subject to rules in common because you're sharing common areas of the building with others. So it's built for that purpose, not for you to enjoy it absolutely for yourself. So if you're not game for that, you mustn't get into a condominium because you will be suffering at the end of the day.
Exactly. I think later down in the program as well, we can speak a little bit about some key areas that individuals should really look into before considering the purchase of a condominium for living in. Now, specifically that you mentioned, sir, relating to the fact that while it is something you own outright, there are conditionalities, there are rules that need to be followed. This shared sovereignty model is something that is observed in these kinds of instances. Can you tell us a little bit more about the restrictions placed, the governances that actually go about when it comes to condominiums, specifically the entire structure that is already in place?
Yeah, so for example, now there are areas which are called common areas. So those common areas like the gyms, the pools, the corridors, those are governed by a set of rules. Those are called house rules. There are a set of basic rules in the Act, but that is very basic. So when it comes to bigger structures, there are very comprehensive rules. For example, how you park your cars, overnight parking, whether you can do repairing, how you can maintain your pets or whatever. All those rules are in detail. They are in very advanced, complex buildings because those buildings have a lot of common things. They have a gymnasium, they have a pool, they'll have a recreational area, they'll have things that people can go and do. So all those are governed by a different set of rules. So if you're going into one of those, it's better to read those rules prior to purchase because sometimes those rules may not be aligned with your way of living. Then the other aspect is there are little areas of the property which are sometimes not part of this complex. For example, a lot of developers are now having very luxury apartments being advertised with great recreational areas like a pool, like a gymnasium, like clubhouses, some even offer golf courses. But you have to look at the legal implications of that because most of those areas they are offering are not part of the condominium property. Then you have to see how you as the owner are going to enjoy those benefits. Otherwise, the developer holds you ransom for those things. Now, there are problems like that because all these coastal belt properties, sometimes they are advertising with massive pools and clubhouses. Then if you go interior, sometimes you find golf courses. So all those are not managed by the property you buy. They are separate properties of the developer. So you need to know what those are. So when you get into these contracts, that is why it's important to have the discussion with the developer and ask them what are these and how they are going to be given to you. So that is another aspect of it. And also when it comes to restrictions, those rules that I mentioned to you, it's from building to building, it's different. Those rules are implemented by the security of the complex. So if you violate them, then you are subject to unwanted torture.
Exactly. I think those are some pitfalls that we need to consistently be understanding of as laymen as well because reading the fine print is very important. Now, specifically as you mentioned, the fact that while we do own the actual condominium in itself and certain aspects relating to it, as you very rightly mentioned, it's not that we have absolute ownership over every feature that is being offered by the developer or the authority that is managing this property. Do you believe, in your experience, you have seen that Sri Lankans are quite aware of this kind of distinction, or is it the case that that the entitlement is there, that all parts?
Unfortunately, I should say within Colombo things are okay, and within higher end apartment complexes they are okay. But our law is governed for every complex. So you have government complexes, you have people in the lower income group which are also in apartments like condominiums. They don't run their complexes properly. Most of the complexes, there is a thing called a management corporation, which I think you are aware.
Yes.
The management corporation is legally created moment the condominium plan is registered. They don't even go to the extent of setting up the corporation and setting up the council. Monies are wired into various retired owners' personal accounts, and they just manage this in a very slipshod way. At the end of the day, if you're in a condominium, you have to realize if you don't maintain your building, within 10 years it's going to be an ISO. And within 10 years, your lift is not going to work, your utilities are not going to work, the building is going to be so horrible you can't exit by selling it because nobody is going to buy that. So if you're an owner, it's your duty to set up this management corporation, put the money into proper use, put it into the bank account of the management corporation and run it properly. That doesn't happen in most of the condominiums other than the lucrative ones. So the lucrative ones, people are a bit richer, so they know how to manage their affairs. They don't want to get involved in unwanted things. So they set up the management corporation, everything runs smoothly. But what you see around Colombo is not what you see on the peripheries. That is a totally different picture. Unfortunately, there are a lot of properties like that, and in time to come, I don't know what will happen to those properties because they are not being maintained well.
Exactly. I think we'll have to get to the specifics as well. As you mentioned, the management corporation is something I want to get a bit of understanding into as well. But before we do so, I think an area that I want to get a bit of clarity in is the legal obligations owed by developers prior to selling and post-selling of apartment units. If you can help us understand that area.
It's a very interesting question because unfortunately in Sri Lanka, if you read most of the acts, the obligations of the developer is not set out anywhere. There is no definition even of a concept of a developer in the act. So anybody can come up and put up a condominium. There is no regulation as to who can do a development. For example, if I am to practice as a lawyer, I have to do a bar exam and there is the Supreme Court that governs me. If I am to act as an engineer, there is a governing body like that. Every professional has that. Here, we are dealing with people's savings, and there is no regulation on developers as to how they should have started the development process, what is the quality, what are the warranties that should be given. None of that is properly regulated. So there's some of the developers, other than the good guys who want to do further and better their name, some of these mushroom guys, they just leave the investor in the lurch. Most of the people have invested their life savings and they just have no apartment, no money, nothing. And in some occasions we find the developers have vanished from the country. So there was a situation where I was involved. I'll just put it in perspective. We'll say they come and buy a property for, we'll say 100 rupees. They mortgage it for 70 rupees. They get pre-sales for about another extra 70 rupees. Once they get all that money, they vanish. So you're ending up with a property there. And ultimately, the bank that lends the money executes parate and takes over the property. So you have no money, you have no apartment, you don't have the developer because those directors have vanished. So there are situations like that also. You have to be very careful when you're investing in brand new apartments and dealing with a developer.
Yes. Some of the other areas now, as you mentioned, there is no proper governing of developers per se, but there is some sort of legal framework that is existing when it comes to the construction of these condominium units and apartment buildings, specifically relating to non-completion or deviation of plans that were previously put out by developers or even delays. Do we have laws in that area or do we not?
Basically, there is, once a developer wants to start a program, they get a preliminary permit to start. Then they have to pass a building plan, which is done by the UDA or municipality, depending on the size of the structure. So those procedures are there. Once they get all the licenses, all that, they will go to the Condominium Management Authority and get their final approval. But the issue is compliance with these time frames are not happening. The Apartment Ownership Act has time frames set out, but nobody is complying with that. Of course, you have to understand there were situations in this country that you couldn't comply. So if you look at the last 5 years, what happened in Sri Lanka, you couldn't comply. But most developers sometimes are relying on those incidents, but their completion date was much before COVID, much before diesel issues, much before power issues. So those time frames sometimes are in the breach. And recently there is a judgment of the Supreme Court which found fault with the UDA and the CMA and awarded damages of rupees 10 million by the for the developer to pay and to be kept in account and to monitor and remove all unauthorized construction. So what happens is sometimes there is a plan passed and everything is happened and then there are amendments and nobody knows what those amendments are. You buy an apartment looking at a plan that is shown by a developer. What happens when there are changes? Nobody tells you that. So then when you go in there, you notice the mezzanine floor has been converted into 2 other apartments and stuff like that are there. And whom do you go and complain to? So you have problems like that. And the CMA has powers to inquire into this, but there is delay there. And when it comes to enforcement, they have problems because the relevant statutes doesn't have proper teeth to like reprimand these directors because the directors are staying behind the corporate way. So they need to be found fault if something has happened.
Exactly. I want to get to further specifics relating to the management corporations and the practical aspects as well. But we do have to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back after this. Stay tuned. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty.
Hello, my name is Pavitra Hapuarachi and I am a currently undergraduate in Colombo University Faculty of Law. My question is on practicalities, what should one be wary of when purchasing a condominium unit?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in conversation with Mr. Senaka Desaram, attorney at law, relating to condominium law and condominium properties and also the fundamentals relating to this area and major pitfalls that we have seen as of recent times. Thank you very much, sir, for the previous segment. I believe we got a lot of contextual understanding into the biggest issues that we have seen when it comes to condominiums and those related properties. Now, what we just got done speaking about is the addressing of delays and deviation from plans. And as you mentioned, there are lapses in the legislature when it comes to accountability. Are there specifically remedies available for buyers when it comes to the practical aspects that we just spoke about in the law, especially when it comes to failing to deliver on the final product? Is there any sort of litigation that's available?
Yes. So for a buyer, ultimate recourse is based on your sales agreement. So when you go to buy an apartment, the developer will give you a document, which is a sales agreement. Unfortunately, most of them will not vet it through a lawyer or something like that. So those agreements are weighted heavily towards the favor of a developer. So when that happens, they have covered most of the tracks with regard to delay. So they use force majeure clauses, they will have other clauses saying that in the event these happen, we are entitled to delay, and so on and so forth. But your primary remedy is purely on this contract. And if you need to sue the developer, then you have to go to the district court where the developer resides and file action. But if you don't negotiate these agreements, they are basically one-sided agreements. It's like going to a bank and getting a credit card. We don't look at that, we sign it. Most of the guys do that. So you need to look at those documents, look at those agreements, and if you put pressure, sometimes they are made. If you just go through with it, then you don't get the opportunity. Don't ever go and give a deposit without the sales agreement. I see a lot of clients coming to me, they have given that initial advance, which is something very small, 500,000, 1 million, 2 million. So people are happy to pay that and get a receipt without the sales agreement. Once you give that money, you're stuck with them because if you want to get it out, it's tough. And you need to be going behind them. Make sure whatever money you pay is with the sales agreement signature. Sign the sales agreement after going through it. If you're not happy with it, negotiate it. If they're not willing to negotiate it, don't go. Because now in Sri Lanka, there are so many apartments you can buy. You need not go to a developer, you can buy even a second-hand apartment. If you buy a second-hand apartment, you have so many benefits as well because you don't have VAT. You know what you're buying. You can go look around. You are happy. You immediately buy it. And if you're worried about that you can't put up the capital one shot, you can mortgage it. So second-hand apartments also are lucrative in that sense. But you have a big capital gain in these new constructions because they'll give it to you at a reduced price. By the time 4 years go, construction is done. Yeah, it's a massive capital gain of maybe 10, 15 million rupees. You can exit easily. So, of course, the developer has to be good. If you get caught to a bad developer, you're stuck with it.
So, when it comes to ownership for living in specifically, as I understand, second-hand apartment or purchasing is a little bit more advantageous.
It's safer. It's safer in the sense you know what you're going into, you know what you're buying, and you get the apartment then and there. But the other issue is you may not get a capital gain. And if you see most of this industry, the people are buying as an investment. So most of them, there are people who come and just buy 3 to 4 apartments in one complex. Purely they are going for resale. So they wait 4 or 5 years and they do a resale agreement. So that sort of thing can't be done with a second-hand apartment.
Yes. And now to get to that practical aspect that we weren't able to touch on previously, which is management corporations that you just very rightly briefly touched on before in our first segment. Can you help us understand how exactly management corporations work and why they are essential for structures like condominiums?
Yes, so the management corporation, a lot of people think that you have to go and run and incorporate it. That is not the case. In the Sri Lankan law, moment you register a condominium plan, the management corporation comes into being by operation of law. Whether you like it or not, it is there. But most of the people, other than lucrative apartment complexes, which I told you before, they just forget about it. They are not interested in running a management corporation per se. There are reasons for that. If you are doing a management corporation properly, you need to insure the building. You need to know what the building requires. All those are costs. So the owners get together and they say, no, we don't want to do all this. We will manage the way we can. So the management corporation comes into being with the incorporation of the condominium plan, and there is an annual registration which the CMA does. So people get misled. You have to go annually and pay a small fee, and the CMA will annually re-register you after the AGM process that takes place. So the management corporation is a legal entity. It can sue and be sued by its own name. It manages all the common elements, but it doesn't own the common elements. It's only managing. So if you have the pool, the gym, and the recreational areas, that will be managed by a management corporation. It's like a company, and it has, like a company has a board of directors, it has a council, maximum of 14, minimum of 3. So the council has to run. If you look at these big complexes, people are not going to run those common areas because it's like running a restaurant, right? You have a recreational area, the pool, the gym. It's a tedious task. You haven't gone and bought an apartment of that caliber to go and run a management. So then what the management corporation does is they appoint a managing agent. That is also permitted. That is why in these big complexes, you have companies that are doing this for the management corporation. But the ultimate responsibility is with that council who is responsible to the management corporation. Annually, this council has to come up for re-election, and you take a vote on it, and council members are appointed. Another thing we have is people are not interested in getting on the council because you have to fight with people. So we notice in most management corporations at the AGM, there is hardly anybody coming volunteering to be on the council. So those problems are there.
Yes, and when it comes to management corporation specifically, as you mentioned, it's strictly managing, no ownership, and as there are quite a few pessimistic sides in joining the council as well. But structurally speaking, in the instance of not having a management council and having one, as you mentioned, it is advantageous that there is one in order to ensure management. But are there structural weaknesses in the concept of a management council in itself, or do you believe that if it's there, then lots of things will flow much smoother?
Well, it's there in the law. The problem is the owners don't want to do it. Some owners don't want to do it. So they just will get some person to manage the building for them because it's cheaper. But it's like being penny wise and pound foolish. So on the long run, they are going to get hit because that building, I mean, you can just walk around the coastal areas and see some of the apartments that are not maintained well. And if you look at those, they are next to the sea. And it's a matter of time where that sea breeze is going to go into the structure, and you don't maintain it, you are going to have it. So they don't see the other side of the coin. They are only looking at it from an annual point of view. So that is why the lucrative apartment complexes, people are willing to spend. So they will do everything perfectly. Every council meeting also is minuted perfectly by a third party. So it happens like a company. But you go to the others, you don't have any council meetings. The management corporation doesn't exist for them. They also don't care as long as common things work. That's about how it's happening. So they will suffer in the long run. But most of them, when things get bad, they will sell and go. So you have to be careful when you're buying into a second-hand apartment if the management corporation is not functioning. Because the structure of the building, the maintenance has been neglected for so many years.
Yes. And getting into the nitty-gritties, in your experience, so what have you seen as the most common conflicts that arise between management corporations and owners, specifically when it comes to maintenance, and also the fees aspect and decision-making?
So the first confrontation that happens annually is the fees, because this goes up every year. So generally what we do is we submit a budget. Before the AGM, we submit a budget of the expenses for the year ahead. So we naturally put this percentage increase. Now, who knew that fuel will go up so much? How do you run a generator, right? So that has to be absorbed. So whenever you do a budget, you have a fairly, I mean, you think very optimistic, but you have a budget and you increase the rates that. So security, janitorial services, pools, gyms, you can work out with the service provider and tell them what is your fee for next year. You list all those down and send the people at the budget. But at the AGM, they will fight it and they will want the same fee. They'll want the building run for last year's facilities for the next year at the same fee, which you can't do. That's the initial fight. The other fights are how you maintain your home rules. Like some people like to hang their clothes on the balcony, right? It's not permitted in some places. You can hang in some places below visual height. So then if you see somebody hanging, you have to send the managers and get it pulled down. How you park your cars. If it is allocated parking, you have no issue. If it is not allocated parking, there is a gazette which says first come, first serve. So then what do? People who come early morning, they'll park the best place they want and they'll go. Then the other person will say, no, that is my spot. I was given this spot by the developer, but legally not recognized. So then you have to deal with those issues. Those are the other issues. Dealing with the rules. Then when we were in COVID and all, we had rules as to how you will keep your shoes out and stuff like that. Those things sometimes continued after COVID also. So then when you go to implement the rule back to the pre-COVID stage, there are conflicts. That is why nobody wants to get onto the council, because you become unpopular in your own building. So dealing with the management fees and dealing with the rules are the primary issues you have when you're dealing with the council of the management corporation.
Yes. I think a big question that lots of individuals have when it comes to management corporations and their handling of fees is the transparency aspect of it. And that is an area I'd like to dwell a little bit further with you as well. So do you believe that there is adequate functions or adequate provisions in place to ensure transparency, or is that something that has not been negated by the law?
According to the law, you need to only provide annual accounts which is audited. So it's like a company. So the whole year can go and you can do audit and submit the audit to the AGM. But there is nothing you can do if there is a rogue as the treasurer. Now I have had experience where big complexes, the treasurer does a business in PETA. This is just a practical experience that I had. And he is rolling the money of the management corporation to do his business. So within 20 days, he resettles the account. So unless you really look at your account, you cannot catch it. You cannot catch it. And these are big money. If you are talking of 300, 400 units of a building, the management corporation fees for the year is huge. And you have lots of money. So you need honest people on your council, especially the treasurer. And if you don't have honest people, and if they are crafty people, then sometimes they can manipulate it. Sometimes you will not catch it, but it is in the safe zone. Sometimes there have been robberies and they have sold and gone also, you can't catch them. So it's like a company. So as I told you earlier, you get thefts in companies as well, so there can be thefts here also. You must be careful whom you put to those places as treasurer, especially the treasurer.
Yes. We have to get to the specifics relating to disputes and renovations and alterations and all that updates as well, but we have run out of time in this specific segment. So we're going to go in for a short commercial break. You're watching Law, Land and Liberty here on Derana News Channel. We'll be right back with the final segment. Please stay tuned.
Hello, my name is Kavinga Sevandi and I am a first year undergraduate student in Faculty of Law in University of Colombo. Today my question is, one of the future, can we expect the improvements to this law in the near future?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We're in our final segment, a conversation with Mrs. Senaka Desaram relating to condominiums and their practical issues under the law. Thank you very much for the previous two segments. We are running out of time in this segment, but there are a few more issues that we need to discuss before we wrap up on our discussion. Now, this is a question that has consistently been brought up in public forum, specifically how the law deals with nuisance issues like noise complaints or short-term rentals like Airbnbs or other tertiary rentals, and also the misuse of common spaces. Are there laws set out specifically for these issues, or is that governed solely within that condominium authority?
Yes, so as I told you earlier, there are house rules. So if the noise levels go above those house rules and all that, you can go there, get your manager, get your security and stop it. Also, if there are no house rules, you can't be a nuisance anyway. There are anyway rules with regard to noise. Now, there are sometimes apartments where they are having parties there, right? So, I mean, once or twice, some people allow it. But if it continues, then you can make a complaint to the owner. You have to deal with it, the owner, because these things happen through tenants, short-term tenants or long-term tenants. As you said, Airbnb, some people might come for 10 days and they might think it's a wonderful apartment to have fun in Sri Lanka, and it has happened. So then you have to send the security and you can reprimand them and tell them to stop it. Also, when it comes to long-term rental or Airbnb, that is also regulated by the house rules. There is also in the gazette submitted by the CMA which says you can't do short-term lettings unless there is a lease agreement. So there is ambiguity in that. But this is a thing that cuts both ways. If you are not going to allow things like Airbnb subject to house rules, then the value of the apartments are also going to be affected. If you are the owner, you would like to make some money out of it. It's your right. but it can't be the nuisance at the risk of the nuisance to everybody. So when you're on the council, you have to decide where are you going to draw the line. Are you going to allow Airbnb or not? How are you going to monitor it? You don't know who is going to walk in. The owner will give you an authorization letter and you won't know whether it's Airbnb or not. But with gradual passage of time, you know what's happening. So then you have to deal with it with the owner. So there are situations where a lot of foreigners have taken apartments and they have now converted them into offices. So when you go and open the apartment, there is a long table with so many monitors and they are only running an office there. So it's not meant to be like that. So then you can use the rules that it's only for residential purposes, not have 20 people in a 3-bedroom apartment and so on and so forth. So you can deal with these issues and your security has to be there.
Yes. And another question that pops up quite a bit when it comes to the ownership of these condominiums is renovations and alterations. Of course, once we are sold a unit, that unit is more or less going to be identical towards all the others within that floor, if that is the common case. But there may be instances where alterations would want to be preferred to be done, or even renovations to change things up. Does the law clearly define exactly what is allowed and what is not?
So the law defines a thing called unauthorized construction. So if you are going beyond the building plan, that is an unauthorized construction. But that doesn't prevent you from doing any interior changes. But for you to do that, you need to get approval from the management council. The management corporation has to give you approval for that. And what I would like to advise the old apartment council members are, if you don't allow this, the value of your building is going to come down. Because if you see some of the buildings that were put up 30 years ago, it's not suited for modern day living. So anybody buying in there will want to renovate the inside. You certainly can't do renovations outside. But within that person's personal space, he must be able to change the toilet, change the pantry cupboards, not breaking of walls or structural beams or something like that. That is permitted subject to the approval of the management corporation. So that is done through a process. You need to get an engineer to give a report saying that this doesn't affect the structure, and you get the piping guy, the gas guy to say this is not going to affect all this, and then you give approval from the council and let it go. When you approve it, you have to set out the times. You can't allow them to do structural renovations maybe like in the afternoons, because some of the people are sleeping at that time. So you have to be watchful. So if you're buying into apartment with the hope of renovating it, please don't buy it without knowing the rules the management corporation has, because some people are totally against it. So don't go there and expect them to change their mind. For example, if you have a complex with a lot of older people, they are not interested in your renovation. They want their peace and quiet.
Exactly. Final question, sir, relating to the practical aspects now to close off. When buying a condominium, as a potential buyer, what are key things that an individual needs to be aware of before walking into a purchase agreement?
Yeah, so there are two types. One is, as I told you, where you will buy a condominium through a developer which is ongoing in construction. That is a process where the building is not there. So the first thing in that sort of process is know your developer. Now, this also I can't give a guarantee because some good developers also have crashed. So we don't know how a good developer can. Then most of the big boys also didn't comply with the time frames, right? So if you go in to buy in an apartment complex, know your developer, do your checks. You can go to the CMA and ask whether there are any complaints of this developer. But if it's the first time they are doing it, they will not have. But you can go to the CMA and have a chat. See who is on the board. Are they respectable people, known people? See who their engineers are, who their contractors are. That will give you a rough feel. Look at the location. Do you think the place will sell? If it doesn't sell, then you are going to be though you buy, and if it doesn't sell, it's going to be stuck. Once you do that, also look at the location of your apartment. Now, I'll give you a classic example. There was a lady who came to me and said, my God, I have an apartment very overlooking the pool. It's just like as if I can jump into the pool. So I told her, you're not going to be happy because you're going there for relaxation, and this pool is going to be noisy. She didn't listen to me. 4 years down the line, she has come back to me and said, what you said is correct. They are even in the pool after 10 in the night. So know the location of your apartment. The location is actually very important, even if you see the sun sets from the east to the west. So if you buy an apartment on the east or the west, the sun is going to bake you for so many hours. So location is important. What are the facilities they are giving? What is the guarantees they are giving? Those are things you will have to look through the sales agreement. That is the first part. The second part is where you go and buy a second-hand apartment. So if you're buying a second-hand apartment, walk around the building. If you see moss, not painted properly, not maintained, there is no proper manager, the lift is not working properly, it's not clean, that is the first sign to show that the people living in that complex don't care about good living. Don't touch it, right? That's the first sign. Then after that, once you satisfy that, then go and see whether you are really interested in what you are going to buy. And see whether your particular apartment, when you're going to buy, just as much as when we buy a house, you check whether water bills, electricity bills are paid. In apartment complexes, there are 4 types of costs, about 5. That is your gas bill, your water bill, your electricity bill, your management corporation fees, which a lot of people forget. So sometimes people have bought apartments and those guys have left a massive management corporation arrears bill, which they'll come behind you to pay. So you can go to the manager and ask how much is the arrears. So those 4 plus your rates and taxes, because some of these apartments in Colombo, if you're buying, have a very high rates and taxes rate. So if you're buying, you have to factor into those costs as well when you're putting the purchase consideration. So those are the basic things I can tell you in this limited time frame.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we didn't have as much time as we would have liked to get into the specifics. I'm sure with your practical experience, there's quite a lot more unthinkable things that could have happened when it comes to the law relating to condominiums as well and how laymen can approach it ideally. But I believe we got as much contextual understanding as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Mr.
for
Senaka
inviting
Desaram.
me.
Thank you for your time. All right, well, we leave you tonight with the words of Rick Renzi. Home ownership is the cornerstone of a strong community. That's all we have for you tonight on Law, Land and Liberty. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great night.